Something is happening right now that the financial press is technically reporting, but fundamentally not explaining. The numbers are in the public domain. The data is published by official institutions. The World Gold Council releases it every quarter. The IMF tracks it. Reuters covers it. And yet the real meaning of what these numbers represent, the actual reason behind the behavior they describe, is never discussed in the same sentence as the data itself. That is not an accident. That is the nature of truths that are too structurally uncomfortable to say aloud in polite financial company. So I am going to say it. I am going to say it the way I say everything, slowly, clearly, and grounded entirely in mathematics. Because I am 95 years old, and I no longer have patience for comfortable half-truths dressed up as financial analysis. What is happening is this. The central banks of the world, the institutions whose entire purpose is to manage the confidence in paper money, are quietly, urgently, and in historically unprecedented quantities buying gold. And what I want to teach you today is not just that they are doing it. I want to teach you what it means that they are doing it. I call this the confidence exit. And once you understand it, you will never look at a paper currency the same way again. Let me start the way a teacher starts, with a single number. In 2022, central banks around the world purchased more than 1,136 metric tons of gold. That was the highest level of central bank gold buying since 1950. Most people looked at that number and moved on. I did not move on, because in 2023, they bought more than 1,000 tons again, and in 2024, they bought more than 1,000 tons again. 3 consecutive years above 1,000 tons. For context, the average annual central bank gold purchase between 2010 and 2021 was 473 tons. What we are witnessing is not a fluctuation. It is not a trend. It is a structural shift, a quiet, methodical, institution-level repositioning from paper assets to physical gold at a pace the modern financial world has never seen. And in 2025, even as gold prices reached record highs 53 separate times during the year, even as the price of gold climbed 45% in a single year, making each ton progressively more expensive to buy, central banks still purchased 863 tons. They bought less than the prior years, yes, but they bought at nearly double the historical average. They were not deterred by high prices. They were not deterred by record valuations. They kept buying. When the most sophisticated institutional buyers in the world keep purchasing an asset, even as its price climbs to all-time highs, you are not watching routine portfolio management. You are watching something more fundamental. You are watching insurance being purchased at any price, because the thing being insured against has become too real to ignore. Now I need to teach you something about the National Bank of Poland, because Poland is not a country most people associate with leading anything in global finance. And yet for 2 consecutive years, Poland has been the single largest gold buyer among all central banks on Earth. In 2025 alone, Poland added 102 tons of gold to its reserves. Gold now represents 28% of Poland's total reserve holdings, and they have publicly stated a target of 30%. I want you to think about what that means. A European nation, a NATO member, a country deeply embedded in Western financial institutions, has decided that it wants nearly 1/3 of its entire national financial safety net held in physical gold rather than paper currency or government bonds. Not 5%, not 10%, 30%. And Poland is not alone. Turkey added 45 tons in January 2026 alone, bringing its reserves to 565 tons. Kazakhstan is buying. Brazil is buying. India is buying. China has been accumulating gold steadily month after month, year after year, never announcing targets, never stopping purchases. The World Gold Council's 2026 survey found that 68% of central banks globally plan to increase their gold holdings this year. 68%. That is not a trend at the margins. That is a consensus among the institutions that run the world's monetary systems. And when those institutions reach consensus, I pay attention. I have been paying attention for a very long time, and what I see looks familiar in a way that should concern every person who earns a salary, saves in a bank account, or holds any portion of their wealth in paper currency. I want to take you back to August 15, 1971. Not because history is interesting, though it is, but because what happened on that day is the single most important unresolved event in the history of modern money. And I mean unresolved literally. On that Sunday evening, President Richard Nixon appeared on American television and announced that the United States would immediately suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. For the previous 27 years, under the Bretton Woods Agreement, every dollar in circulation had been backed by a fixed amount of gold. Foreign governments could take their dollar reserves to the United States Treasury and exchange them for physical gold at a guaranteed rate of $35 per ounce. This was not symbolic. This was the foundation of every exchange rate, every trade agreement, every central bank reserve calculation in the world. And Nixon ended it in a single televised announcement. He called the suspension temporary. He said it was a necessary measure to protect the dollar from speculators. He promised stability. That was 55 years ago. The suspension is still in place. What Nixon's decision created, and I want you to understand this clearly, was the world's first fully global experiment in money backed entirely by confidence rather than by anything physical. No gold, no silver, no commodity, nothing tangible. Just the collective agreement that the paper was worth what it said it was worth because the most powerful economy and military in human history said it was worth that. For 3 decades, this experiment worked brilliantly. The dollar remained the world's reserve currency, not because it was backed by gold, but because America's economy was the largest, its institutions were the most trusted, and the alternative cost of switching was too high for any nation to bear alone. The system ran on inertia, and inertia is a remarkable force until it meets an object it cannot move. The object the current monetary system cannot move is mathematics. And I want to explain that to you the way Charlie Munger would have explained it, with uncomfortable precision. The United States national debt currently exceeds $36 trillion. That number is almost too large to process, so let me give you a different number. The interest payments on that debt in 2025 exceeded $1 trillion for the first time in American history. The United States government now spends more money paying interest on its existing debt than it spends on national defense, more than Medicare, more than discretionary spending of almost any category. And the debt is not shrinking. It has not shrunk in any sustained way in the lifetime of anyone watching this. The Congressional Budget Office projects that under current trajectories, U.S. debt will reach 150% of GDP within the next decade. Japan has already crossed that threshold and has been at those levels for years. The European Central Bank sits above debt to GDP ratios that would have been considered catastrophic by any economist writing before 1990. This is not alarmism. These are the published projections of the institutions responsible for managing these systems, and the central banks of the world can read those projections. They have access to the same mathematics. They have access to better mathematics than you and I can access, and their response, expressed not in press releases or policy statements, but in the physical, irreversible act of buying gold, is telling you something that no speech, no forecast, and no interview will ever tell you directly. They are building a lifeboat, not because the ship is certain to sink, but because the mathematics of the ship's condition makes prudent people quietly build lifeboats without announcing they are doing so. Let me explain what I call the weaponization moment, because there is a second reason central banks are buying gold, and this one is more recent, more concrete, and in some ways more important than the long-term debt mathematics I just described. In February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States and its allies responded by doing something that had never been done before to a major economy. They froze approximately $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves, assets held in Western financial institutions, denominated in dollars, euros, and pounds. They did not seize them permanently in that moment. They froze them. They made them inaccessible. And in doing so, they demonstrated to every central bank in the world, ally and adversary alike, that dollar-denominated reserves held in Western institutions are not neutral assets. They are assets that can be turned off. The financial world had always known this theoretically. The 2022 action against Russia made it empirically real. Within months of that decision, central bank gold buying accelerated sharply. That is not a coincidence. Every central bank that holds significant dollar reserves, and that is nearly every central bank on Earth, suddenly had to ask a question they had never seriously asked before. What happens to our reserves if we ever find ourselves on the wrong side of American foreign policy? What happens to the financial safety of our nation if the assets we have spent decades accumulating can be frozen by a decision made in Washington? Gold cannot be frozen. Gold held in your own vault, in your own country, subject to your own laws, cannot be accessed, sanctioned, or weaponized by any foreign government or institution. It is the only major reserve asset in the world with that property, and after February 2022, that property became the most valuable feature in global finance. Goldman Sachs noted this shift explicitly. J.P. Morgan analysts cited it as a structural driver. The IMF's own data showed that gold's share of global central bank reserves rose from 12% in 2020 to 15% in 2025, the fastest five-year increase since the immediate post-war era. The weaponization moment did not create the gold buying trend. It accelerated a trend that was already rooted in the deeper mathematics I described earlier, but it added urgency. And urgency, when it is felt by 68% of the world's central banks simultaneously, produces the kind of buying pattern we are now witnessing. I want to address something you are probably thinking right now. You are thinking, Warren, if central banks are so worried about the dollar system, why is the dollar still the world's reserve currency? Why has nothing collapsed? Why are we not already in the crisis the gold buying seems to signal? And that is exactly the right question. So let me answer it honestly. The dollar system has not collapsed because complex systems do not collapse like buildings. They do not fall all at once. They erode. They fragment at the edges. They lose authority in small, incremental ways that are invisible until the cumulative weight of the erosion becomes undeniable. In 2001, the dollar represented approximately 73% of global central bank reserves. By 2025, that number had declined to approximately 58%. That is 15 percentage points of reserve dominance lost in 24 years. That is not catastrophic collapse. That is quiet, steady erosion. And the gold purchases are, in part, what is absorbing that 15%. The central banks reducing their dollar exposure are not replacing it with euros or yuan or any other fiat currency. They are replacing it with gold. Because gold is the one asset that carries no currency risk, no counterparty risk, and no political risk. It is the one form of reserve that does not require you to trust any government, any institution, or any alliance that might shift. Goldman Sachs now forecasts gold reaching $5,400 per ounce by the end of 2026. J.P. Morgan projects $6,300 per ounce. These are not fringe predictions. These are the most conservative, most data-driven financial institutions in the world, telling you that the structural demand for gold is not going to reverse, because the conditions producing that demand are not going to reverse. The debt levels are not going to reverse. The geopolitical fragmentation is not going to reverse. And the quiet, institutional recognition that the 55-year experiment in pure fiat currency is approaching its mathematical limits. That recognition is not going to reverse. Now let me tell you what this means for you. Not for central banks, not for governments, for you, sitting where you are right now, earning what you earn, saving what you save, planning what you plan. The people signing gold purchase orders in Warsaw and Ankara and Beijing are not doing it because they read an article. They are doing it because their entire institutional function, the protection of national monetary stability, demands that they respond to mathematics rather than narratives. You are under no such institutional obligation, but you are under the same mathematics. Every dollar you hold in savings loses purchasing power every year in which money supply grows faster than economic output. That has been the condition of virtually every major currency every year since 1971. The dollar has lost approximately 87% of its purchasing power since Nixon's announcement. That is not a talking point. That is a Federal Reserve calculation. The question I want you to sit with is not whether gold is going up or down this month or this year. The question is the same question the central banks are asking in their private deliberations. What portion of your financial life should be held in an asset that no government can print, no institution can freeze, and no crisis can create more of? That question does not have a single right answer for every person in every situation. But I will tell you this. When the institutions with the deepest research, the longest time horizons, and the most at stake in the stability of the paper currency system are quietly building their gold reserves at historically unprecedented rates, when the people who run the machine are buying insurance against the machine, that is not a signal I ignore. I have never ignored that kind of signal, and the signals I have paid attention to in this life have served me considerably better than the ones I dismissed. I want you to imagine you are sitting somewhere quiet, many years from now. You can no longer change what you did today. You can only look at it. And the question you ask yourself is not whether you were right about the timing. Nobody is right about timing. The question is whether you understood what the mathematics were telling you at a moment when the evidence was available, the pattern was clear, and the only thing standing between you and preparation was the human instinct to believe that because nothing has broken yet, nothing will break. In 1971, Nixon told the world the gold suspension was temporary. It has been 55 years. The experiment in confidence-backed money has produced extraordinary prosperity for some and quiet, steady erosion for many. Central banks bought 863 tons of gold in 2025 alone, nearly double the historical average, even as prices hit all-time highs. 68% of them plan to buy more in 2026. The IMF, the World Gold Council, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and the actual purchasing behavior of the world's monetary institutions are all pointing in the same direction. The door to the cage is open. The cage, in this case, is the comfortable belief that the institutions managing the world's money have everything under control, and that the gold they are quietly accumulating is just routine portfolio maintenance. It is not routine. The numbers are not routine. And the real reason no one mentions is not a secret. It is simply that some truths, once spoken aloud by the institutions responsible for maintaining financial confidence, become the very crisis they are designed to prevent. So they buy quietly. They accumulate carefully. They say portfolio diversification in press releases, while their vaults fill with the oldest form of honest money the world has ever known. You have today. You have this information right now. What you do with it is the only decision that belongs entirely to you.